First of all, sorry for our scheduling conflict there. I completely messed that up, and that's annoying when you like are trying to live your life around a newborn, and then I messed up. So my apologies. And secondly, thanks for being my practice client. Okay. What I want to do is like walk through, tell you what's going on, and just like walk through kind of like a rough draft, do like a rough draft with you, and get your feedback on like, is stuff helpful? Does it make sense? Is there stuff you'd want to see added, etc., etc.? So if you want to help me out with that, that'd be awesome. So essentially the program looks like this. It's going to be broken into 3 modules. The first one is reconnecting with our core and pelvic floor, and it's like a lot of core work and breathing. The second one is like mobility and posture stuff. So doing stretches and certain mobility work to help like in pregnancy, we lose like a lot of like we get really tight in, let's say, our hamstrings and hip flexors, and we get really bad posture from feeding our baby and all that stuff. So it works on lengthening the muscles that have tightened over pregnancy and all of this. And it helps you with posture, because you're gonna end up with shitty posture if we don't lengthen those muscles and strengthen our back and glutes and stuff like that. So that will be the second module. And then the third module is like getting back into exercise. So that is learning like how to bring what we've learned in the first 2 modules into our basic exercises like squats, lunges, a push muscle or a push exercise, pull exercise, etc. So it'll be like how I'm seeing it play out. It'll be like a 30-minute virtual one-to-one doing that, and then you'll get homework for the week. So whether it's whatever for exercises it is, and then next week we do the second one, and the third week we do the third one, if that makes sense. Okay. So the first module is going to be the core and pelvic floor stuff. So I know we've talked about this stuff before, but I'm going to go through everything just because I want to make sure I cover everything and practice, okay? So in pregnancy, okay, first of all, let's picture our core as a canister, as a pop can, okay? So we have the top of the pop can is our diaphragm, the bottom is our pelvic floor, then we have our abdominal wall, so our abs, and our TVA, transverse abdominal, deep core, whatever you want to call it. And then we have like the lower back. So when we think about engaging the core, we don't just think about like sucking our belly button in. We think of squeezing that whole can, like compressing the can from all sides. All 4 walls are coming in on that exhale. So in pregnancy, we thought of that as kind of hug the baby. You wrapped that deep core around that baby to help that abdominal, like that intra-abdominal pressure, so those ab muscles weren't separating as much as they would be if you weren't doing that. However, in pregnancy, no matter what you do, those ab muscles are going to separate. Your belly got big, it happens, so it's likely you have some type of separation. So we're going to talk about things you can do to kind of repair that and what you can do to not make it worse, okay? So postpartum, you usually get, say, a clearance at 6 weeks. You're like, go, okay, you're fine, go exercise. But like, what does that look like, right? And it doesn't look like jumping right back into the exercises that you were doing pre-pregnancy. Your body is, whether you worked out all through pregnancy, it doesn't matter. Your body has changed. It's gone through labor. It's gone through all of this stuff, and we need to rebuild, hence the program name, our muscles, all of that stuff to get back into exercises. So that's kind of the point of this program, is just slowly learning how to do all these things. So when we start lifting weights, picking up heavy weights again, doing high intensity exercises, we are going to be strong, we're going to do them properly, they're going to be effective, and we're not going to cause further damage to our core or pelvic floor. And eventually, you know, you're going to be bouncing around with Cole, you're going to be, you know, hopping on a trampoline, jumping. Now you probably won't jump rope with a baby or a boy, but you won't pee your pants, right? Because we're working on strengthening that and taking care of our pelvic floor, which is so important. So that's kind of like what we're going to work on with the core. And then you obviously, like we've talked about the pelvic floor, so just to touch on that, like when a lot of people think it's like labor and birth that messes up our pelvic floor, and it's not, it's the pregnancy, right? Like there's so much pressure on that floor, it's literally a floor, that we want to make sure that we are working on it afterwards to strengthen it, and also making sure we know how to release it as well and rest it, because sometimes when we have leakage and stuff, like I know when I went to the pelvic floor therapist, she explained it one time, like if you constantly hold your bicep tight, it gets strong, but it gets tired, right? So if we're constantly tight and holding tension in that pelvic floor and not letting it release, that's not good either. So we need to kind of find a balance with that. And then in the actual program, like you don't need to know this, you know this, I would go through when to see a pelvic floor therapist. So, you know, if you have prolapse, if you have like severe pain, if you have pain during sex, all that stuff, go do that, okay? Covered that. Sorry, I'm gonna talk a lot in this, but just bear with me. So I wanna cover that. So, I mean, like I said, essentially the goal for this first module is just learning to reconnect and repair that core, okay? So what we're gonna do, you don't really need any like equipment or anything today. We're just gonna do some practicing of that core breathing. So come onto your back, and we're gonna go over a couple cues, and we want to start pretty much every workout, especially any core workout, with at least 10 breaths. But the homework from today is going to be doing 30 of these breaths a day, and we want to be practicing them in different positions. So we want to practice them on our back, we want to practice on our side, we want to practice on our hands and knees, and we want to practice sitting and standing. So you can do it at any time. Like if you're sitting there watching a show, if you're standing driving, you can do them. If you're doing dishes, you can practice standing. If you're just watching TV at night, it's a good time to come down on the ground and do that. So this is kind of number one where we're starting, and I'm going to go through it very detailed, even though I know you're familiar with this, but it's just good, again, practice for me. And you can give me feedback if this is helpful, okay? So when we think about the inhale, we are thinking about the 360 breath and expanding that rib cage. So I don't know if you've noticed this, but in pregnancy, sometimes our rib cage expands, okay? You might have found that your bras feel tighter around here, and we can fix that. So they expand because our belly got big, and if we weren't practicing constant mobility, then they sometimes get stuck like that. So we have to kind of work on bringing them in and tightening those muscles to get rid of that flare, okay? So when we do that inhale, 360 all the way around, we're expanding in around that whole body into our belly. So we take that inhale all the way around, and at the same time, we are relaxing that pelvic floor on that inhale. So we are releasing that pelvic floor. As we inhale, our diaphragm pushes down, so then it's pushing, so our diaphragm and our pelvic floor work together. They come up together, they go down together. So when we exhale, they come up. When we inhale, they go down. So we inhale into that 360 breath, release that pelvic floor, and then on that exhale, and I'm sure you've heard that before, so to engage our pelvic floor, we can visualize sucking a blueberry up that vagina. So that's how we're kind of thinking. That's a good cue. You can either suck a blueberry up there, you can picture sucking through a straw through your vagina, whatever it is on that exhale, you think about pulling that pelvic floor up. The Bell method also has a cue where you think about, you do it one at a time. So you think about sucking a marble up your butthole, a blueberry up your vagina, and then a flaxseed up your pee hole. So it's kind of from the back to the front. I hope Dalt is around and just walks in for this moment. And he's like, why is Bree talking about sucking marbles into her butthole? That is a good cue to kind of help you with that, okay? So on that exhale, you pull up that pelvic floor and engage that deep core. So cues, there's a few different ones that you can use. So sometimes it just takes a different one to really feel it. So one is taking a zipper and zipping it up from your vagina up. So you think about on that exhale, pulling that pelvic floor up and then zipping that zipper up, that deep core, wrapping that corset from the bottom up on that exhale, okay? Another one, and I think one of my favorites, is picturing a string tied to each hip bone, and then on that exhale, you pull those strings together, pulling those hip bones together. And the final one, which is also helpful with that rib flare, on that exhale, picture
like decreasing the space between the bottom of your rib cage and your like pelvis or vagina area. So as you exhale, squeezing that. So again, on that inhale, we are doing that 360 breath, releasing that pelvic floor. And then on that exhale, we engage, we pull up that pelvic floor and engage that deep core by one of those 3 cues. So we are picturing that deep core or that TVA or transverse abdominal, whatever we want to call it, as a core set. So on that exhale, what we're doing is we're pulling that core set together and we're strengthening that deep core. And that's going to help kind of strengthen that core, bring those ab muscles back together. And it's going to protect, as we do these exercises, that core from those abs muscles from separating even more. So while we're here, a couple tips, and I've told you them before, but I want to make sure they get into the video and passed on when you're coming out of bed in the morning or from any laying down position when you're working out. We're not doing this. We're never doing that jackknife because it's doing exactly that. It's not helping. So anytime you're exercising or coming up, we're rolling onto our side and using that arm to push ourselves back up, okay? And another one, when you're getting into exercises, you might hear about that coning or doming that we want to avoid. So if you were to go here and do a sit-up and look at your stomach, you might notice like it cones or it domes here when you're not doing that engagement properly. So if you just jack yourself up and notice that, that's kind of something, especially early postpartum, we want to avoid. So doing things like crunches, we're not really gonna get into that right away until we've really practiced and mastered that deep core connection. And then we can kind of do exercises that you may see that coning and doming and it's not as dangerous or detrimental then. We do want to kind of progressive overload and get to that point. But in the beginning, when we're just repairing that core, those are some things we want to avoid, is that coning and doming and really that pressure on that abdominal wall there. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. So we're just going to practice a few breaths here. So we're going to inhale. Remember, 360 breath. And then release that pelvic floor and exhale, engaging that pelvic floor and that deep core. And we're just going to do like 5 breaths here. And you might notice, you may have done this throughout pregnancy and you were good feeling that connection, and then all of a sudden you have the baby, and I noticed this. And for someone that was very in tune and very good at connecting that, right after birth, I was like, I cannot connect with these muscles. Like my brain wasn't working, my muscle wasn't working, the connection wasn't there. So as boring and as terrible as this is, like this breath work is so important, getting you back into exercise, healing that core. A lot of people like a year postpartum are like complaining that they have that, like they call it the mop pooch, right? Where you just can't get rid of that belly. And a lot of the times it's because we haven't strengthened that deep core. So it's really hard to kind of get that, not flat, but like stronger core instead of that like pooch where it hangs out, right? And we're also, if we don't strengthen that deep core, we're going to mess up our posture and we're going to end up with low back pain and all that kind of stuff as well. So, and if practicing this deep core stuff is super important. So I want you to do 30 breaths a day if you can, okay? So let's come over onto our hands and knees, and it's going to feel different in all different positions. We're going to inhale, feeling that pelvic floor relax. And then as we exhale, sucking up that blueberry and engaging that deep core. Inhale, release, exhale, engage, and do a few here. And it also helps on that exhale, it can like make it an audible exhale, like you are blowing out, you're not just gently blowing. Picture blowing out of your mouth out of like a small straw, like a juice box straw. So as you're exhaling, you can hear that breath. Big inhale,
And the more you do this, the easier it gets, and you start to feel that connection with both your pelvic floor, and it gets a lot easier. Okay, so 30 breaths every day. I want you to do different positions. So hands and knees, coming down onto your side here. Same thing, inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. And then you can move, we're going to eventually, the goal is, a 90 degree is another one. I'm gonna write this all to you and send it to you, but I want us to practice them so you know what they are. On your couch, in that 90 degree position here, and practice with that breathing. So that is something you should be doing every day, okay? And then as we progress, we start to add in some tension, resistance. We start to push our limbs away from our body, adding that in with that breath to make it a little bit difficult. So as we extend those arms and legs, it gets harder. We can add tension with resistance bands, with balls, all of that stuff, and we kind of work our way up. But first, we just want to master the breath. So that's all, I think that's all we'll cover for today. You're like, well, that was boring and stupid, but it's so important. So practice those breaths, and then I'm going to send you another video with core exercises that you can work on, okay? So I went through that quickly, or you're like, that was not quick, that was very long. But if you have any questions, start practicing that breath work, and then I'm going to send you a core, like just kind of some beginner core stuff to work on, that you can do that. But anytime you start that exercise, if I don't mention it, I want you to do 10 of those breaths to connect to that core before you go into the exercise, okay? All right, awesome. Okay, I actually lied. I think I want to add these 4 moves into like the first part and then do a separate like deep core workout, okay? So in addition to your 30 breaths a day, these are, we're gonna say 4 exercises that you can add in as well when you're doing your breaths, after you're doing your breaths, or you can do them separately, okay? So these are 4 that you can, are really good beginner ones. So we are going to, and this one is super easy, okay? We're gonna add in pelvic tilts. So on that inhale, we're releasing, and then on that exhale, you're not really gonna see much here, but you are tucking that pelvic. So Quiet's crying. We inhale and release, and then on that exhale, we're doing the same thing, engaging that pelvic floor and that deep core, but we're tucking that pelvic. So tilting, inhale, on that exhale, tilt, inhale, tilt. So that's one. Those are going to be called pelvic tilts, okay? When you see that, that's what that is. Makes sense. Next, we are going to do, I think, some heel slides, I think. So anytime we're pushing a limb away from our body, it's going to add that extra tension. So we're going to inhale, and then on that exhale, as we lift that pelvic floor and engage that deep core, we slide that leg out and bring it back in. Then we switch to that other side. Same thing, slide that leg out and bring it back in, okay? Second exercise. We'll call those leg slides. And then knee drops. So we're going to take a big inhale. And on that exhale, we're going to take that left knee, drop it to the side, and bring it back up. Inhale. On that exhale, we're going to drop that knee and come back in. So you're just kind of alternating sides, and you're practicing that inhale and release, and then exhale with that lift and engage. Okay, so I'll show you, I'll send you like a write-up of how many reps and how long to do it, etc. So those are going to be the knee drops. And then the final one, we're going to come over onto our hands and knees, and it's called a quadruped lean, okay? So you're going to take your inhale, and on that exhale, you are again engaging that pelvic floor, deep core, and you're just leaning forward. Inhale and come back. Engage, exhale, and leaning forward. Feeling that connection. Just that slight lean forward on that exhale. So the exhale, always think it's on like the work part of the movement. So even when we get into exercises, we're always exhaling on the hard part of that exercise, okay? So 30 breaths a day, switching up those positions depending on where you're at, and then those 4 exercises as well. And I'll tell you kind of how many reps, how often to do them in a little type out. And then yes, let me know if any of that doesn't make sense or if you think anything else should be in there, okay? Thank you for taking that 20 minutes for me. You're the best.